Well, let's talk about this and all of the events last night as well with Sir Iain Duncan Smith, former Conservative Party leader. He's also MP for Chingford and Woodford Green. That's in Tier 2. Good morning to you, Sir Iain.
Morning.
Your
Morning,
reaction,
Julia.
first of all, to the news that the government has confirmed that Pfizer and BioNTech, their COVID-19 vaccine, has been approved for use in the UK.
Well, it's excellent news, and the good news is that all those areas that have worked on these vaccines, after all, this is one, but there are two others now
Yep.
that had full regulatory approval. So there are three now, it appears, that certainly are available or should be available. The question is how quickly and in what scale. And of course, as you said, the delivery. But anything that starts to put us back together again, because the economic harm that has taken place in the UK, we saw the figures the other day, is the worst really for 300 years outside of wars, and likely to get worse before it gets better, as the forecast says. So let's fingers crossed hope that this works and we can get it out
Yeah.
obviously as quickly as possible. But well done the scientists that did it.
Absolutely. I mean, again, we used to say the Moderna and Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines not far behind. And also, of course, there is the added bonus. It's pointed out by the Financial Times today that actually, if we were still in the EU, we would be waiting for first approval as early as January, because there's concerns that because the EU is just taking a much longer time, they're not going to even look at one of the vaccines until early January. Another meeting delayed until the end of December. We are allowed to make decisions ourselves and push, not rushing these things through, but getting these things through, making our own decisions. What do you make of that? A clear benefit from Brexit.
I love the way you managed to segue straight off into the Brexit, Julia, which I thought was you get an award for that. I think it's brilliant. But yes, absolutely right. And the fact is, our system is more flexible, and actually, what we found is that we were the centre for tests, for scientific tests, for drug tests here in the UK, but that disappeared under the new regulations from the EU a few years ago. But we can again be a centre for excellence in the UK, which we are showing. And interestingly, there are two of the vaccines, funny enough, which I'm sure Matt Hancock will explain to the listeners, are more difficult to transport. They have to be held in very, very, very low temperatures. And I think those will head straight for the health service first and care homes. But the Oxford one is the one I think that we have huge hopes will be the one that is on
It's
much,
cheap.
much
You can
longer.
roll it out much more easy. Indeed.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's all the good news. The bad news is last night that you and the other Tory MPs who voted against the government weren't enough to actually end these very, very, very cumbersome tier restrictions on vast amount of the population. 99% of the population's in tiers 2 or tiers 3. It's lockdown light, even though lockdown officially finished at midnight last night for an awful lot of people. Shops reopening, gyms, hairdressers and the like, but huge restrictions certainly in tier 3 for 40% of the country in terms of being able to go to pubs and restaurants. Huge effect on people's private lives and the freedoms, but also, of course, the huge economic impact for the hospitality industry and their suppliers and the like. Were you ever hopeful that there would be enough MPs to defeat the government once we knew that particularly that the Labour Party were going to abstain on this?
No, in all reality, we knew all along that the government will almost certainly have got their legislation. What we were trying to do was to make a critical point, which is that the government has rolled into this tier system. Now, I was in favour of coming out of lockdown. I wasn't in favour of going in. I thought the original tier system, now the evidence shows, was actually flattening and reducing the infection rate. You only have to look at Liverpool to see that even in tier 2, now the figures show that they were falling in infections. So that was working, but we went into lockdown. That lockdown will have had an even more dramatic effect. And we're making this decision, we felt, very early on before we have the full evidence of what the lockdown has done. And that's the first point. The second point, which is that the government has a very tight tier system now, much, much tighter. As you say, nearly half the country in tier 3, a very tight lockdown damaging the hospitality sector, and tier 2, the other half of the country pretty much. So with that, the question I asked is, why are we going into such a tight tier system when we know that the lockdown will have had a major effect? And we now know the R rate is now in England below 1 and will fall even more because the effects of lockdown will still fall through the next 2 weeks. And it turns out that the real problem was that the government's decision, which was an arbitrary decision, to go to a 5-day relaxation over Christmas with 3 families meeting together, has meant that Sage and other scientists have said to the government, well, that's going to create an increase. So you're going to have to tighten right up on the way into Christmas and possibly even go into a lockdown after Christmas if the R rate goes up. And so the question we had was, look, the hospitality sector is being hammered, yet they're the ones that have made the most efforts to ensure that that infection rate doesn't rise under them. In fact, their evidence says that there's hardly any infection increase inside pubs and restaurants properly managed. But in the homes, that's where the increase takes place. And so that 5 days, we now realize, has had a dramatic effect on the nature of this Christmas period for the hospitality sector and some of the retail industry. And my question there is, why, therefore, don't we debate all of that at the same time? And if that's the case, well, maybe we could have had a more balanced period through Christmas to allow the hospitality sector to do better during this Christmas period to get them through the next few months.
And again, it was quite clear that the government went on a real, and Boris Johnson personally in the House of Commons, a real charm offensive to try and persuade a lot of MPs. I mean, this is certainly up from the vote against the lockdown originally, 55. This gives me some hope that if there were a move to have a third lockdown, indeed, I fear at some point we're going to be in lockdown 47 at some point. But in January, February, it moved for more of a lockdown. That actually there may well be the votes to stop that, because it does appear that Sir Keir Starmer, I mean, no outrageous playing politics. I mean, there's no moral backing for his stance whatsoever. But that his view that he doesn't want any lockdown vote to be, or any extra tier restrictions votes to be carried on Labour's votes. He just wants to sort of go along for the ride but not be held responsible for it. If there is still Labour abstentions on issues like that, we could well see enough Tory MPs angry at the tier restrictions and angry at the damage being done to the businesses and the jobs in their constituencies, that we could see the government simply being unable to push those restrictions through.
Actually, the figure is near 70 people who didn't support the government. Everyone has to remember that there were abstentions, people who wouldn't vote against, but certainly couldn't vote for. So the figure is even higher. And the reality is that we knew very well that this wasn't going to stop the government, because the government was going to get its way. But the key thing is that this is to say to the government, you can't just plough on like this. You've given next to no evidence about the dramatic effect on industry, livelihoods, the lives that come, and on the health effects wider. The government was asked for this full cost benefit and health analysis. They produced really a very poor document the day before the vote. And it turns out they said they didn't have the scope to do this, but it now turns out that there is, in fact, in government, what they call an economic effects dashboard, which looks at all of these things and gives them a very, very clear picture. And they refuse now to let that out publicly or release it, which is what we were asking for. And so the key thing is, these are big decisions, and this is not about a political party. The public out there need to know that we are trying our hardest to make sure that these things are debated properly, and that they understand that something like Tier 3 spells the end for many in the hospitality sector. Many pubs and restaurants will never open again after this. So we were holding on the hope that just before Christmas they would have at least a bit more freedom. Many of them won't have that freedom now, half the country. And that's where we said it's worth giving us the real reasons why that's the case. And if the decisions in Christmas or on the economy are vital, then we should make a more balanced decision.
Yeah, and indeed, again, as you point out, Tiers 3, they're closed. Tiers 2, a lot of places saying, look, that's not viable with the restrictions they have in terms of social distancing, and with the fact people are not allowed to meet other households, and even just two couples meeting up, or indeed two separate people, individuals meeting up. Given that is still illegal, that makes it virtually impossible for them to survive as well.
Yes, that's the whole point, really. And people will say, you ask the question, do you want to go into lockdown or into the hard tiers to save lives? There is not, this is the other bit that annoyed a lot of people. Too many in the government have said that this is either save lives or let it rip. This has never been the debate. The debate was, what's the balance here as we go forward to try and keep many in the hospitality and industries generally working as much as they possibly can to give people their income and their livelihoods, while still trying to keep control of the virus. And that's the point, getting the balance right, not just saying it's either or. Either we do this or you guys want just to let it rip. This was an insane and appalling piece of behaviour from many and some in government. And that actually annoyed a lot of people who actually, I was happy to be in the tier system, but not as it stands at the moment, in a more flexible one. And that's what the debate was, and that's what the vote was last night.
So, Iain Duncan Smith, well, I for one thank you for the work that you're doing on this, and for trying to bring some sanity to proceedings. So thank you very much indeed. I know a lot of my Talk Radio listeners will feel the same way as well.